The Force saw nothing. Yeah. Let that sink in for a second. I've covered a lot of Star Wars crossovers on this channel, but the second I saw the idea behind this one, I knew we had to talk about it. Because this isn't just Darth Vader fighting another alien army. This is Vader and the Emperor going up against an enemy so ancient, so completely outside everything they understand, that even the Force can't tell them it's there. And check this out, the invasion doesn't come from space. It comes from underneath the Empire itself. Whole sectors disappear. Entire planets go silent, and by the time Vader realizes what's happening, the enemy has already been waiting for 60 million years. Trust me, this story gets absolutely insane, and the deeper Vader digs, the worse the truth becomes. Let's get into it.
The transmission lasted 11 seconds. Not 11 seconds of useful content, 11 seconds total, including the 3 seconds of carrier signal before the garrison commander's voice appeared, the 4 seconds of what he actually said, and the 4 seconds of progressive corruption that consumed the transmission from the outside in, stripping the carrier frequency at a molecular level while it was still broadcasting, so that the last thing the Times inexorable communications officer heard was not static, not interference, not the specific white noise of a signal lost to distance or solar interference. Silence. Clean silent. The kind that happened when something removed a signal rather than when a signal failed. Communications Officer Tarn played it back 3 times before she reported it to Captain Orvex, because she was the kind of officer who confirmed before she delivered, and because something in the quality of the silence made her want to be wrong about what she was hearing. She was not wrong. The Galar Sector garrison, she said. 6 weeks ago. This is the last transmission we received from any source within the sector. Orvex looked at the audio display, at the 11-second waveform, at the way it ended, not the gradual drop-off of a dying signal, but the specific vertical termination of something cut. "Play it," he said. The garrison commander's voice came through. 4 seconds. The voice had the quality of someone reporting something they did not have the vocabulary for, not panicked. The specific flattened register of someone whose panic had been replaced by the professional obligation to transmit information before the transmission became impossible. Galar Prime Garrison, command to Imperial Fleet Dispatch. There is something coming through the ground, not seismic. Something is coming through the ground and the biological monitors are. Everything organic is being. I need you to understand that the biological monitors are reading. The silence. Tarn looked at Orvex. Orvex looked at the display. 6 weeks. The Galar Sector 17 inhabited systems. 200 million people. 3 garrison worlds. The specific, unremarkable administrative presence of a mid-tier outer rim territory that generated its tax revenue and its conscription quota, and its resource output with the reliable competence of a sector that had never given the Empire cause for concern. 6 weeks of nothing. Sector scan, he said. The Times' inexorable sensor array ran the full sweep. The science officer, a young man named Draven, who had been in the position for 14 months and had never had to deliver news that exceeded his operational models, looked at his display for a long time before he turned around. "Captain," he said, "the planets are intact." Orvex looked at him. "The atmospheric chemistry is consistent with previous surveys," Draven said. "Surface topography is unchanged. The cities are. The structures are standing. Everything that should be there architecturally is." His hands moved across his console in the specific way they moved when he was running the same scan again to confirm it. "There is no biological matter in the sector." The bridge was quiet. "Say that again," Orvex said. "No organic material," Draven said. "Of any kind. On any of the 17 worlds. Not colonist remains, not vegetation, not microbial life in the soil." He looked at the display. "The sector has been stripped of every molecule of organic matter. Completely. As if it was never there." Orvex stood at the center of the bridge and looked at the sector scan and processed what he was looking at. 17 intact worlds. No living thing on any of them. Not destroyed. Not bombed. Not the specific debris field of a rebel attack or a catastrophic failure. Intact. The evidence of 200 million lives, the buildings, the roads, the water reclamation infrastructure, the landing pads, the specific accumulated material evidence of human civilization present and complete. Without the humans, without anything that had ever been alive. He activated the fleet channel. "Get me, Lord Vader," he said. What happened to Galar had begun 29 days before the transmission. The colony's geological monitoring equipment flagged the anomaly first, the specific seismic signature of something moving deep beneath the bedrock of Galar Prime. Something enormous, moving with the deliberate rhythm of directed motion, rather than the random pressure shifts of geological activity. The monitoring system generated a report. The report entered the administrative queue. The queue routed it to the sector's Geological Analysis Office on Galar Secondary, where it sat waiting for a staff member to review it. The staff member never reviewed it. The tomb world had been sealed beneath Galar Prime for 60 million years. 60 million years of geological time had moved over it, continents shifting, oceans redistributing, the specific patient work of a planet doing what planets did over geological timescales. The tomb chambers were 3 kilometers below the current surface, which was 40 kilometers of bedrock lower than the surface had been when the tomb was sealed. Because 60 million years of sedimentation had buried everything, none of it had touched the tomb. The chambers were built from living metal that repaired itself as fast as geological pressure could damage it. The seals were absolute. The Canoptech spiders that maintained the internal systems ran their maintenance cycles with the specific patient reliability of machines that had been running the same cycles for 60 million years and had never had cause to stop. The activation sequence was initiated by the Sautek dynasty's awakening protocol, a signal propagating across the Necron sensor network that had been in place since before the galaxy's current civilizations had developed the capacity to build signal receivers. The sequence took 3 standard days. On the 4th day, the first Necron warrior phased through 3 kilometers of bedrock and stood on the surface of Galar Prime. It stood in a field outside the colony's eastern agricultural district. It looked at the colony, not with eyes with the sensor arrays that serve the same function, processing the environment with the specific efficiency of systems that had been designed 60 million years ago by beings who understood sensor technology at a level that the galaxy's current civilizations had not approached. It registered organic material, high density, distributed across the settlement. The reanimation protocol database updated with the current location. The second warrior phased through, then the third, then 10,000. The Canoptech scarabs came with them, not deployed, emerged, in the way that things emerged when they were already where they were going to be, and simply became active. They moved in clouds that blocked the morning light, the specific insect swarm quality of them visible from the colony's eastern watchtowers, where 2 garrison guards were watching the horizon and could not process what they were seeing because nothing in their experience had given them the category for it. The garrison commander activated the alert. The troops deployed. They fired. The blasters were effective. Warriors going down. The living metal bodies unable to function with their locomotion systems disrupted. The specific, satisfying result of modern weapons against slow-moving targets that suggested the threat was manageable. The warriors stood back up. Not all of them, not immediately. But the ones that had gone down were already being rebuilt. The Canoptech spiders, moving through the advancing warrior lines, coordinating the reanimation protocols, pulling the dispersed matter of damaged warriors back into coherence. The garrison troops watched the targets they had put down rise from the ground with the specific fluid motion of something that had not been stopped, merely interrupted. They fired more. The warriors advanced through the fire at the pace they always advanced. Not running, not charging. The specific, deliberate stride of something that understood that pace was not a vulnerability because time was not a resource the garrison had that the warriors did not. The garrison ran out of power cells. The warriors did not run out of anything. The Canoptek scarabs reached the colony proper at 0847 hours. They consumed everything organic. This is not a metaphor. The scarabs did not attack, did not hunt, did not kill in the way that weapons killed. They processed. They moved through a space, and everything biological in that space became fuel and raw material for the reanimation protocols. The process was not violent in the conventional sense. It was the specific violence of a process that was indifferent to the status of its feedstock. The garrison commander transmitted for 11 seconds. Then there was nothing organic left to generate a transmission. The Times, inexorable Times, was still in Galar orbit when Lord Vader's shuttle came through. Orvex watched it on the approach display with the specific quality of attention that officers gave things that reduced their operational responsibility, not relief. The professional acknowledgement that the situation had been elevated to a level at which it could be properly addressed. Vader did not come to the bridge. He went directly to the surface. The shuttle descended through clear atmosphere, nothing to interfere with it, nothing alive to generate weather patterns that might have produced clouds. The specific meteorological stillness of a world whose water cycle had been interrupted because water cycles required organic catalysts in the soil to function correctly, and the soil had been stripped of them. The city spread below. Orvex watched the shuttle's descent on the sensor display and thought about the scan data, intact buildings, intact roads, no biological matter, and tried to find the vocabulary for what he was looking at. He did not have the vocabulary. Vader walked through a city of 200,000 people who were not there. The streets were clean in the specific wrong way, not swept clean, processed clean. The molecular level absence of everything that was not mineral or synthetic. The pavement was intact. The buildings were intact. The street lighting was still functional on the buildings that had independent power systems. The cargo containers, stacked at a loading dock, were intact. Their contents, if the contents had been inorganic, still inside them. The people were not there. Not their remains, not their belongings, not the organic components of their belongings, the leather, the textiles, the wooden furniture, the food. Everything biological, removed. Everything mineral and synthetic, untouched. He extended the Force. He extended it the way he always extended it when arriving somewhere new outward, reading, building the picture. The Force told him about the city, the way it told him about all spaces, through the living things in it, their presences, their emotions, their intent. There were no living things. The Force found nothing. Not the dark signature of mass death he had felt that at Alderaan. The Force screaming as a billion lives ended simultaneously, an event so large it had registered across the galaxy. Not the residual presence of lives recently ended, which clung to spaces for days after. Nothing. The Force had no record of this city. It was as if the 200,000 people had never been here. He walked through the specific silence of that, and processed it with the specific discipline of someone for whom processing what they did not want to be true was a professional function. He reached the city square. He stopped. He extended the Force again. With the full focused attention he gave things that required his complete capability, not the ambient reading of a space, the directed reading of someone looking for something specific. The Force found the paving stones, the buildings, the cargo containers, the molecular composition of the air. It found nothing that had ever been alive, and nothing that was currently alive, and nothing that would tell him what had happened here, because the Force spoke through living things, and the living things were gone. He stood in the city square of a city he could not read and understood. For the first time, in 20 years of using the Force as his primary intelligence tool, what it meant to be operating without it. The Necron warrior phased through the paving stones 10 meters in front of him. Not from underground through. The phase technology depositing it from the tomb chambers 3 kilometers below directly to the surface, bypassing the intervening matter as if it did not exist, arriving in the city square already standing, already oriented. It looked at him. He extended the Force toward it. Nothing. The Force passed through the warrior without finding purchase. No living thing to read, no consciousness to sense, no intent to anticipate. The Force did not register the warrior as present. The Force registered the space the warrior occupied as empty. He was looking at something the Force could not see. The warrior raised its Gauss flare. His lightsaber was already in his hand, not through Force precognition, through the combat reflex that 20 years of fighting had built independently of Force sensitivity. The purple-white blade caught the light. He had never fought something the Force could not tell him about. He fought it anyway. The Gauss flare discharged. The bolt was not blaster fire, not plasma, not the photon-based energy of Imperial weapons. It was molecular disruption, a beam that stripped matter from its molecular bonds and dispersed it. He deflected it, the lightsaber plasma blade interacting with the bolt and redirecting it. The physics working even when the Force could not tell him the bolt was coming because his body had learned to read the weapon's charge cycle in the first tenth of a second of the engagement. He closed the distance. He bisected the warrior at the torso. It fell. He looked at it. The two halves lay on the paving stones. The living metal had the specific quality of damaged things that were not dead, no bleeding, no organic cessation of function. The lights in the sensor array eyes still running, the molecular structure of the living metal still coherent in each half. The halves moved. He watched the reanimation protocol activate, watched the two sections of a bisected being begin the process of pulling toward each other. The molecular cohesion of the living metal, rebuilding the connections that his lightsaber had severed. Not quickly, not in seconds, but it was happening. He destroyed it more thoroughly. Force telekinesis, the one Force ability that worked against the warrior regardless of whether it was living, because the Force did not need the target to be alive to move it, pulling the two halves apart while they were trying to come together, the lightsaber reducing sections to fragments, the fragments to smaller fragments, applying the systematic destruction that the initial engagement had not applied. The reanimation protocol found insufficient material. It did not reconstruct. He filed this. Molecular dispersal below a threshold defeats the protocol. 20 meters away, another warrior phased through the paving stones. He looked at it. He looked at the ground beneath it, at the sealed city square, the intact paving stones, 3 kilometers of bedrock below that. And then the tomb chambers that his Force sense could not find, because the tomb chambers contained nothing alive, and the Force did not read empty metal chambers. He understood something. The tomb was below every world in this sector, below 17 inhabited worlds, and however many uninhabited ones. The garrison commander's transmission had said times something is coming through the ground times, and had been correct in exactly the way the garrison commander had not understood when he said it. There was no perimeter to hold. There was no invasion force crossing a border. The enemy was already inside every world in the sector, had been inside them for 60 million years. The invasion did not arrive from outside, it erupted from beneath. He activated his communication channel. "Piet," he said, his voice carrying the flat specific weight of someone who had assembled a picture and was transmitting the relevant portions of it. "I need a full sector scan. Every system within 30 light years. And I need to know..." He looked at the warrior now, walking toward him, at the pace it always walked, the specific, deliberate stride of something that understood that pace was not a vulnerability. If any of them have gone silent. The answer came back in 4 minutes. Piet's voice had the specific quality it had when he was delivering information that exceeded his operational models, and was delivering it with professional composure anyway, because professional composure was what the situation required. "My lord," Piet said, 12 more sectors." Vader looked at the warrior. 12, he said. "Silent within the past 6 weeks, Piet said. "The same pattern as Galar, last transmissions corrupted and cut. No signal since." The sector scans show a pause that was not hesitation, the specific pause of someone reading a display and confirming what they were reading before they said it. "The same as Galar, my lord. Intact worlds. No biological matter. 13 sectors. In 6 weeks." He looked at the city square around him, at the intact buildings, the functional street lighting, the cargo containers at the loading dock, the specific material evidence of human civilization operating as intended without the humans. He looked at the warrior, still walking toward him with its Gauss flare raised, at the pace it had been walking since it phased through the paving stones. The pace that was not aggressive, and was not urgent, and was simply the pace of something that was going to reach him eventually, and was not concerned about the eventually. He destroyed it. He walked back to his shuttle. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he could fight it, and he needed to fight it before the 13 became 30. Above the city, the Time's inexorable times held its position in the clear, empty orbit of a world that had been stripped of everything that lived. Below the city, in chambers sealed for 60 million years, machines that had been running for 60 million years continued to run. In the dark between the stars, they had always been waiting. The Empire had built its power on the assumption that it was the most ancient thing in the galaxy.
And honestly, this is the moment the story hooked me. The invasion isn't arriving from outside the Empire. The enemy was already there. That's such a terrifying concept.
It was not even close. Vader's report reached the Emperor at 0300 hours Coruscant Standard Time. Not through the standard fleet communication chain directly. The specific channel that existed between them, and only between them. The dark side connection that Palpatine had built into the master-apprentice relationship over 20 years. The channel that did not require a communications array because it ran through the Force itself. Palpatine received the report in his meditation chamber. He did not respond immediately. He extended the Force toward the Galar sector, the specific directional extension that he used when he wanted to read a situation at range. The dark side mastery that had let him feel the fall of the Jedi Order across the galaxy in real time, that had let him watch Vader fight on Mustafar from Coruscant, that had let him navigate 30 years of galactic politics by being able to feel what everyone involved was actually doing beneath what they were publicly doing. He reached toward Galar. He found nothing. Not the signature of mass death. Billions of people dying left marks in the Force that persisted for years. The specific resonance of that many lives ending simultaneously. Not residual dark side energy, dark magic, Sith artifacts, concentrated malevolence, all left traces. Not even the baseline hum of a living sector, the ambient Force presence of 200 million people going about their lives. Nothing. He extended further, toward the 12 additional sectors Piet had identified. Nothing. 13 sectors. Hundreds of billions of lives. The Force had nothing to say about any of them. He sat in his meditation chamber and ran the Force extension with the full concentration of the most powerful dark side practitioner alive, applying every technique he had developed across 6 decades of deepening his connection to the Force's dark current, every method of extending his awareness across the galaxy that he had spent his career perfecting. The Force told him nothing. He had not experienced this before. He sat with that fact for a long time. Vader was back on Galar Prime when the second Tomb World activated. Not in Galar, in the adjacent Tesran sector, 3 light-years away, which placed it within the range of the Time's inexorable, is enhanced sensor array, and therefore within the range of the data Draven was now building, compiling, cross-referencing with the previous 6 weeks of sensor blackouts in a way that was producing a picture he had not been asked to produce, but that his specific scientific instinct told him was more important than anything he had been asked to produce. The activation was visible on the sensor array as a seismic event scaled to the size of a planetary crust shifting. Draven watched it. He watched the specific signature of it, the way the seismic event propagated from a single point, 3 kilometers below the surface of Tesran Tirius, moving upward rather than outward. The specific geometry of something rising rather than something shifting. He pulled the geological survey data for Tesran Tertius. Standard survey. Conducted 11 years ago during the sector's initial Imperial administrative intake. The bedrock composition. Igneous rock formations. Mineral distribution consistent with sector average. No unusual subsurface features noted. He pulled the current scan. The current scan showed a subsurface structure 3 kilometers below the surface that had not been in the 11-year-old survey. Not a structure that had been missed. A structure that had not been there. He looked at the specific architecture of what the scan was returning, the material composition, the geometry, the specific dimensional measurements of chambers that extended for what the scan suggested was hundreds of kilometers in every direction beneath the surface of Tesran Tertius. He looked at it for a long time. He opened a channel to Vader's surface position. "Lord Vader," he said, "I need you to look at something." Vader looked at Draven's data on the shuttle's display. The subsurface structure scan. The geological survey from 11 years ago showing nothing. The current scan showing hundreds of kilometers of sealed chambers, 3 kilometers below a world they had been administrating for 11 years. He looked at the seismic activation event. He looked at the geometry of the chambers. "When did the chambers appear?" he said. "They didn't appear, my lord," Draven said. The voice of someone who had confirmed this before he said it. "The survey 11 years ago used standard penetrating sensor depth 20 meters. The chambers are at 3 kilometers. They were always there. We were never looking deep enough to find them." Vader looked at the display. At the chambers that had been there for the entire 11 years of Imperial administration of the Tesran sector. "How many worlds show similar structures?" he said. The pause before Draven's answer was the pause of someone who had been running this scan and had arrived at a number and was deciding whether to deliver it or run it again to confirm it. "We've been scanning at 3-kilometer depth since we identified the Galar structures, my lord," he said. "In the 17 Galar sector worlds, all 17 show the same subsurface architecture. The 7 worlds we've been able to scan in adjacent sectors." Another pause. 7 for 7. Vader looked at the display. "Every world we scan," he said. "Every world with sufficient geological age," Draven said. "Yes, my lord." The shuttle was quiet. Vader looked at the chamber architecture on the display, the specific geometry of spaces that had been built with an aesthetic sense that was not organic, not the rounded organic geometry of living spaces, the precise, angular geometry of something engineered by minds for whom function and eternity were the same design principle. "The chambers are sealed," he said. "Yes, my lord. The seismic activation event on Tesran Tertius, that's a seal opening, not breaking. The structure is designed to open." Draven's voice carried the specific quality of a scientist who had found something that exceeded his models and was reporting it with the professional composure he had and not the professional composure he wished he had more of. Whatever sealed them did so with the expectation of opening them again. Vader looked at Galar Prime through the shuttle's viewport, at the intact city he had walked through, at the specific horror of a civilization that had been present and was not present in a way that the Force could not tell him about. He thought about the chambers beneath every world, about the specific implication of chambers that had been there for 60 million years, sealed, maintained, waiting beneath every world. Not beneath some worlds. Every world. "Get me Piet," he said. The briefing happened on the Inexorable's bridge. Piet stood at the display with the map of the affected sectors and the subsurface chamber data and the 6 weeks of sensor blackouts assembled into the picture that Draven's analysis had produced. He had been building toward a briefing like this his entire career, the specific comprehensive situation summary that turned scattered data into actionable intelligence, and he delivered it with the professional composure that the situation required, and that was costing him more than it showed. Vader stood at the display and listened. 13 sectors confirmed silent, Piet said. "Based on the subsurface chamber distribution and the seismic activation events we've been able to track, we believe there are at minimum 40 additional tomb complexes that have not yet activated." He indicated the map. "The activation appears to be sequential, not simultaneous. The Galar tomb activated first. The adjacent Tesran tomb is activating now. The pattern suggests a systematic progression." "Inward," Vader said. Piet looked at him. "The sectors going silent are moving inward," Vader said. He traced the pattern on the display, the concentric geometry of it, the specific shape of a campaign that was not moving at random but was following a logic. from the outer rim toward the mid-rim. "Yes, my lord," Piet said. "At current rate of progression projecting the activation sequence based on what we've observed, the mid-rim worlds begin to be affected in approximately 3 months." The bridge was quiet. "And the core," Vader said. 7 months, Piet said. The number sat in the air of the bridge, with the specific weight of numbers that were both precise and impossible. "What do we know about the entities conducting this?" Piet said. Vader looked at the display. "They are not alive," he said. "Not in any sense the Force understands. They are mechanical, synthetic beings of some kind, housed in metal that repairs itself. The weapons they use strip matter at the molecular level." He looked at the map. "They do not attack in the conventional sense. They reclaim. The worlds they have processed are intact. The organic matter has been consumed." He looked at Piet. "They cannot be stopped by destroying them individually. The destroyed units reconstruct from available matter. To permanently destroy a unit requires complete molecular dispersal." Piet looked at the map. "The garrison forces," he said. "We're never going to hold," Vader said. "The doctrine of engaging them at ground level with standard weapons produces an endless cycle of destruction and reconstruction. The garrison troops fire. The units go down. The units stand back up. The garrison runs out of power cells." He looked at the display. "Standard Imperial ground doctrine is irrelevant against them." "And fleet doctrine?" Piet said. Vader looked at the map. He had not engaged the tomb ships yet. He had the sensor data from the Inexorable's observation of the Tessran activation, the specific crescent geometry of the ships emerging from the planetary shadow where they had been holding position in the system's orbital dark zone, invisible to sensors that were not looking for them specifically. "We don't know yet," he said. "But the fleet engagement needs to happen before we commit resources." He looked at the display. "I need to see a tomb ship up close." The Tessran system engagement was not planned as an engagement. Vader went in the Inexorable to observe the Tessran tomb world activation, specifically to watch the process unfold in real time from a position that could pull full sensor data to understand what the campaign looked like before the campaign's full scale became apparent. The 3 tomb ships in the Tessran system's orbital shadow had been there for 6 weeks, waiting. Not for the Inexorable. They did not appear to register the Inexorable's arrival as an event worth responding to. They were waiting for the tomb world's activation to reach a specific stage, at which point their function in the campaign became relevant. Vader watched them on the sensor display. Crescent-shaped. The specific geometry of a weapon designed to look like what it was: curved, aggressive, the functional aesthetic of something built by beings who considered beauty and efficiency the same quality. Each one, approximately 1 kilometer in length. The sensor array returned readings that Draven spent 40 minutes analyzing, and reported with the specific quality of someone who had found things he did not have categories for. "The hull material is the same composition as the warrior units," Draven said. "Living metal self-repairing, molecular cohesion maintained by active internal processes. The weapon systems." He looked at his display. "I'm reading 2 primary weapon configurations. The first is a high-energy electrical discharge system. The second is a particle beam array." "Range?" Piet said. "The electrical discharge system has effective range of approximately, my lord. The reading has to be wrong." "Report what the reading says," Vader said. "Effective range of approximately 40,000 kilometers," Draven said. "Significantly beyond standard turbolaser range." The bridge was quiet. "And the particle beam," Piet said. "Shorter range, closer to standard engagement distance." Draven looked at his display. "But the beam configuration, it's not a thermal weapon. It doesn't generate heat. It generates a particle cascade that disrupts molecular bonds. On contact with a ship hull, it would strip the hull at the molecular level," Vader said. "The same mechanism as the Gauss flayers on the ground. Scaled to ship combat." He looked at the tomb ships on the display. At the Inexorable and Imperial-class Star Destroyer, one of the Empire's most capable vessels, with shields and turbolasers and hull plating designed to withstand combat at the highest intensity the galaxy's current wars produced. He thought about what a weapon that stripped hull plating at the molecular level did to a Star Destroyer. "Piet," he said, "do not engage." "My lord, we are here to observe," Vader said. "We do not have the information we need to engage." He looked at the tomb ships. Yet, the tomb world activation reached its critical stage. The warriors began to phase to the surface of Tesrin Tertius, in the specific progression that the Galar activation data had established as the sequence individual warriors first, then groups, then companies. The activation building toward the full deployment as the tomb chambers completed their cycling, and the tomb ships began to move, not toward the inexorable, into standard orbit. Vader watched them take up orbital positions that were, in the specific geometry of them, not attack positions, they were support positions. Positioned to provide orbital fire support for the ground campaign if required, to intercept any vessel attempting to reach the surface, and to establish the communication suppression field that the Galar sector's final transmission had described. The Night Shroud. It activated gradually, not dramatically, not with the visual spectacle of a weapon firing. The electromagnetic field built from the tomb ship's emitters, like weather building, the specific progressive quality of a storm front developing. The Inexorable's communications officer looked up from her station. "Captain," she said, "we're losing communications. All frequencies. The interference is..." She looked at her display. "It's coming from the tomb ships. They're generating an electromagnetic field across the entire system."
Quick lore note here. The Night Shroud is one of the smartest parts of this crossover because it doesn't just attack ships, it attacks the Empire's ability to function. That's way more dangerous.
Piet looked at Vader. "It begins with communications," Vader said. "Then navigation systems, then targeting computers." He looked at the tomb ships. "They blind the system before the ground campaign completes. Whatever is in Tesrin cannot call for help. Whatever ships are in Tesrin cannot coordinate. And any fleet that tries to engage in a blinded system is fighting without targeting computers," Piet said. "Against weapons with 40,000 kilometer range," Vader said. He looked at the tomb ships, at the Night Shroud building across the system, at the ground campaign proceeding below on Tesrin Tertius with the specific administrative patience of a process that understood that it would not be interrupted because the ability to interrupt it had been methodically removed. He activated his personal communication channel, the one that bypassed the Inexorable's communications array entirely, running through his suit's independent system. It worked. For now. The Night Shroud was not yet at full strength. "Emperor," he said. The response came through the Force-enhanced channel rather than the electronic one dark side to dark side, the specific channel that existed between them and only between them. "Lord Vader. The warmth in it. The warmth that was always present and always concealed. Report. The weapon system they use to open a campaign," Vader said. "They generate an electromagnetic field across an entire system before the ground forces complete their operation. It disables communications, navigation, targeting. The fleet engagement doctrine we have is built around the assumption that our ships can see and coordinate. Against this field, the assumption fails," Palpatine said. "Yes, my master," Vader said. The Force channel was quiet for a moment. "What else?" Palpatine said. "The ships," Vader said. "Their primary weapons operate at 40,000 kilometers effective range. Our turbolasers engage at 15 to 20,000 kilometers. Any fleet engagement begins with them already inside our weapons range and us outside theirs." Another quiet. "And the ground forces," Palpatine said, "cannot be stopped by garrison troops," Vader said. "The units reconstruct after damage unless completely atomized. Standard blasters, standard military engagement. The units go down and stand back up. The garrisons exhaust their ammunition. The units continue." The Force channel held the accumulation of what he had reported. Vader looked at the Night Shroud building across the Tesrin system. At the communications officer watching her display go dark frequency by frequency. At the specific quality of a situation that he had assembled into a picture and was transmitting to the one person whose response mattered, the one person who had spent 60 years seeing the path through impossible situations, the one person he had never once seen genuinely at a loss. Palpatine said, "Come to me, Lord Vader." Not with the specific warmth of a master satisfied with his apprentice's intelligence gathering, with the specific weight of something else. Vader filed this. "The inexorable will depart the system," he said to Piet. "Before the night shroud reaches full saturation, get us out while navigation is still functional." Piet was already at the navigation station. "And Tesrin?" Piet said. Vader looked at the planet on the display. At the activation proceeding below, at the 200 million people on Tesrin Tertius and the 14 worlds of the Tesrin sector who were, at this moment, in the early stages of what Galar had been 6 weeks ago. He looked at the display for a long time. "There is nothing to be done for Tesrin," he said. The specific flat truth of a man who had run the calculation and found no good answer in it. "Navigate out," he said. "Now." The inexorable broke from the system at maximum sublight before the night shroud reached the saturation point that would have made navigation impossible. Behind it, the night shroud completed its build. Tesrin went silent. The 14th sector. In the dark between the stars, the campaign continued with the specific patience of something that had been waiting 60 million years and did not find the waiting difficult because waiting and not waiting were the same category to something that did not experience time the way organic things experience time. The Sautek dynasty was not invading the Galactic Empire. It was reclaiming a galaxy, sector by sector. At the pace of geological time, the Imperial war room on Vader's command vessel had been built for the specific purpose of managing simultaneous military operations across multiple sectors. It had never been used for this. The map table showed 14 sectors, 14 dark zones where the standard administrative traffic of Imperial governance had simply stopped. The sectors formed a shape on the map that Piet had been staring at for 3 hours, and that the shape of had been telling him something he had not finished understanding yet. He understood it now. "It's not random," he said. Vader stood at the map's edge. "No," Vader said. "The sectors, the sequence of activation." Piet traced it on the display. The first sector, then the ones adjacent to it, then the ring beyond that. Each ring going silent in sequence with the specific regularity of something that was not reacting to the Empire's responses, but was executing a plan that had been written before the Empire existed. It's moving inward. From the outer rim, each activation triggers the adjacent tomb worlds. The campaign is designed to propagate. "Like a wave," Vader said. "My lord," Piet said. "At current rate, if the propagation continues at this pace, the affected zone will encompass the mid-rim in approximately 11 weeks. He looked at the map. "The core worlds in 18. Vader looked at the map. "At the dark zones. At the specific geometry of something that had been planned at a scale that made the Empire's strategic planning look like a preliminary sketch. "We need to break the propagation," he said. "Identify the next activation points before they activate, and..." His communication channel opened. The voice that came through was not Piet's, not the time's inexorable crew. A voice from a different system, entirely the garrison commander of the Valar sector, the next ring out from the activated zone, whose voice had the specific quality of someone who was looking at something on their displays and was reporting it with the professional reflex that training produced, even when training had not covered the thing being reported. "Lord Vader, Valar Garrison Command. We are detecting subsurface seismic activity on Valar Prime, consistent with the Galar activation reports." And a pause. "And we're getting the same seismic signature on Valar Secondary and Tertius. 3 worlds, activating simultaneously." "How many systems in the Valar sector?" Vader said. 11, my lord." Are all 11 showing seismic activity? The pause before the answer was long enough that it was itself the answer. Yes, my lord. Vader looked at the map. At Galar, one tomb world activating, spreading sector by sector. At Velar, 11 worlds activating simultaneously. The campaign was not propagating at a fixed rate. It was accelerating. The Tarkin Doctrine was not a subtle instrument. Grand Moff Tarkin dead at Yavin. His body and his planet-killing weapon reduced to debris that was still expanding outward from the explosion point, had built the Doctrine on a simple and effective premise. The Empire did not need to fight every battle. It needed to demonstrate, clearly and publicly, that the cost of resistance exceeded any possible benefit. One planet destroyed concentrated the minds of 100 planets. Fear was more efficient than force. The Doctrine had worked for decades. The Doctrine assumed an enemy that could feel fear. Admiral Motti, not the Admiral Motti that Vader had choked in the Death Star briefing room, a different man in a different system, but operating from the same institutional framework, deployed the response force to Valar with the specific confidence of someone executing a doctrine that had never failed. 12 Star Destroyers. The reasoning was sound by the Doctrine's own logic. Demonstrate overwhelming force before the enemy can establish a foothold. The Galar and Tesseract activations had been processed while the Necrons were already entrenched. Valar was activating now. Respond now. Demonstrate power now. Motti briefed his captains with the efficiency of someone who had given this briefing many times and expected the same outcome it had produced many times. Decisive engagement, clear victory, lesson transmitted to any other party that might be considering resistance. He did not know about the Night Shroud. He had read Piet's reports. He had the engagement data from the Tesseract observation. He had the specific warning that Vader had transmitted through the fleet, the electromagnetic field, the weapons range, the targeting system vulnerability. He had read it with the specific reading of a man who had never encountered a military situation that the Doctrine had not addressed and was processing the warning through the Doctrine's framework. The warning said, "Do not engage until we understand the weapons system." Motti engaged. The 12 Star Destroyers dropped out of hyperspace into the Valar system at 0200 hours, and the Night Shroud was already active. Not fully, the Valar activation had begun 6 hours ago, and the tomb ship deployment was in its early stages, and the Night Shroud was at 30% saturation when Motti's fleet arrived. 30% was enough to degrade communications across the fleet by half. 30% was enough to make the targeting computers unreliable at ranges above 10,000 kilometers. 30% was enough to matter. The 6 tomb ships were in orbital position above Valar Prime. Motti ordered the engagement. Vader received the Valar battle data in real time through Piet's relay. He watched it with the specific quality of attention he gave things he had told someone not to do, and that someone was doing anyway.
I'm not gonna lie, this might be the most predictable disaster in the entire story. Vader gave the warning, the data was there. The Night Shroud was already active, and Motti still thought 12 Star Destroyers would solve the problem.
The engagement opened at 13,000 kilometers, the edge of reliable targeting range for a targeting computer running at 50% efficiency in an electromagnetic interference field. The Star Destroyer's turbolasers fired. Some of the rounds reached the tomb ships. The living metal hulls absorbed the impacts with the specific quality of material that had been designed to take damage and continue functioning, not shields dissipating energy. The hull itself, managing the impact and redistributing the stress. The tomb ships returned fire. The lightning arc weapons activated. The electrical discharge crossed 13,000 kilometers in the time that light crossed 13,000 kilometers, because it was an electromagnetic phenomenon and electromagnetic phenomena moved at the speed of light, which meant the warning time between firing and impact was precisely the time it took light to travel the distance. 43 milliseconds. No human reaction time addressed 43 milliseconds. The lightning arc hit the lead Star Destroyer shields. The shields did not fail immediately. They were designed to handle energy discharge. The physics of a deflector shield were the physics of energy dissipation, and the lightning arc was energy. But the specific quality of the lightning arc was not a single concentrated discharge like a turbolaser bolt. It was continuous. It maintained connection between the tomb ship's emitter and the Star Destroyer's hull for 4.7 seconds. 4.7 seconds of continuous electrical discharge, conducted through every system on the Star Destroyer simultaneously. The targeting computers failed. The navigation systems failed. The communication systems failed. The shield generator itself, a complex electronic system, experienced cascade failure and went offline. The shields dropped. The death ray fired. The particle beam hit the exposed hull of the lead Star Destroyer at the specific point where the shields had been thinnest, not by targeting precision, by the geometry of the engagement. The beam stripped the hull at the molecular level in a cone that expanded as it penetrated inward. The lead Star Destroyer's forward section ceased to exist in the time it took the beam to traverse it. The ship did not explode dramatically. Explosion required matter to react. The matter had been removed. The forward section was simply absent. The remaining aft sections, no longer structurally coherent, began to tumble. The emergency systems in the surviving sections activated. They were electronic systems in an electromagnetic interference field, and they activated at 30% effectiveness. Mahdi, on his flagship's bridge, watched the lead Star Destroyer's forward section disappear and processed this in the specific way that Imperial officers process things that exceeded their models by doubling down on what the model told them to do, because the model was all they had. "All ships advance," he said. "Close the range. Inside 10,000 kilometers, their weapons lose effectiveness at close range." This was not true. Nothing in the engagement data suggested this was true. He believed it because the doctrine said that closing range neutralized enemy weapons advantage, and the doctrine was what he had, and he advanced. 3 Star Destroyers were disabled before they reached 8,000 kilometers. Not destroyed, disabled. The lightning arc at closer range was more concentrated. The cascade failure was faster. The ships went dark, systems offline, hulls intact. 8,000 crew members on each ship in a vessel that was no longer functioning in the middle of an electromagnetic interference field that was going to be at full saturation in 6 hours. The remaining ships reached close range. The turbolasers fired at point-blank distance. The tomb ships took damage. Real damage. The living metal hulls were not invulnerable to sustained close-range turbolaser fire. 2 tomb ships showed visible structural compromise. 1 was losing attitude control. Mahdi's flagship at 4,000 kilometers was generating real targeting solutions despite the interference, because at 4,000 kilometers targeting computers were almost redundant. He could see the tomb ships on the optical display. He could hit them. He was hitting them. The tomb ships that were taking damage began to withdraw. Not retreating, withdrawing. The specific controlled repositioning of something that had assessed the engagement geometry and determined that the current position was suboptimal. They moved to 8,000 kilometers. Back into lightning arc optimal range. Back outside the close range zone where the Star Destroyers had been effective. The lightning arc fired again. Mahdi's flagship shields, compromised from the earlier phases of the engagement, lost navigation and targeting simultaneously. The death ray fired twice. Vader watched the sensor data and understood what he was watching. Not a battle, a lesson. The tomb ships had let Mahdi's fleet get close enough to do real damage, had absorbed what the fleet could do at close range, and had then repositioned to demonstrate what they could do when the Star Destroyers tried to follow. They were not fighting the Imperial fleet. They were teaching it the parameters of its own irrelevance. "How many ships remain operational?" Vader said. Piet looked at the sensor feed. "4, my lord," he said. The professional composure holding by an effort that was visible if you knew where to look. 3 are heavily damaged. 1 is... He looked at the display. 1 is withdrawing. 1 Star Destroyer, withdrawing at maximum sublight, carrying the data from the engagement back to wherever it could reach. "Tell it not to jump to hyperspace," Vader said. The night shroud will be at full saturation within hours. Navigation calculation in a full saturation electromagnetic field will be unreliable, Piet said. Will fail, Vader said. Tell it to maintain sublight until it clears the system's night shroud radius. Piet opened the channel. The surviving Star Destroyer had already made the jump. The night shroud was at 40% saturation. At 40% saturation, the navigation calculation had a 23% error rate. The Star Destroyer dropped back into real space 11 minutes later, 3 light years from its intended destination, with a catastrophically miscalculated hyperspace exit that had placed it inside the mass shadow of a gas giant. The emergency pull-up was not fast enough. Vader looked at the sensor feed. At 12, Star Destroyers gone, 8 destroyed or disabled in engagement, 3 disabled and drifting in the Valar system, 1 gone into a gas giant, and the engagement had damaged 2 tomb ships that were already, according to Draven's enhanced sensor analysis, showing active repair processes on their hull surfaces, the living metal repairing itself. Mahdi, Vader said. Dead, my lord, Piet said. His flagship's bridge section was in the forward hull area when the death ray... I know, Vader said. He looked at the map. At the Valar sector now going silent. At the specific shape of what the Empire's doctrine had produced when applied to something the doctrine was not built for. He activated the channel to the Emperor. My master, he said, the Tarkin doctrine has failed. We need a different response. The channel was quiet for a moment. Then Palpatine. Come to me, Lord Vader. The second time he had said it, the warmth in it was exactly the same as it had always been. The specific quality underneath the warmth was something that Vader had been in service long enough to recognize. He had never heard it before. The Emperor's throne room on the Time's supremacy times his command vessel in this period between Death Stars. The Superstar Destroyer that served as the mobile seat of Imperial authority had the specific quality of all spaces that Palpatine occupied, darker than they needed to be. The architecture serving the atmosphere of absolute authority that his presence required. Vader stood before the throne. Palpatine looked at him with the yellow eyes that saw everything. Extend the Force, Palpatine said, toward the Valar system. Vader extended. He found what he had been finding since Galar. Nothing. The Force reaching toward the activated sector and finding no organic presence to read, no living thing to anchor the reading. The specific informational void of a space from which all biology had been removed. Nothing, Vader said. Yes, Palpatine said. Nothing. He descended from the throne. Not dramatically, with the specific deliberate quality of someone who is choosing to change their spatial relationship to a conversation because the conversation required it. He moved to the room's edge, to the viewport, and looked at the stars. I have been using the Force to read this galaxy for 60 years, he said. The voice level. Not performing the admission stating it, because the statement was necessary. I have seen threats coming years before they arrived. I have felt the deaths of billions in real time. I have watched the future through the Force's dark current and have navigated accordingly. He looked at the stars. I cannot feel these beings. No, Vader said. Not their presence, not their intent, not their location, not their number. Palpatine looked at the stars. The Force tells me nothing about them, as if they do not exist. They existed before the Force did, Vader said. Palpatine turned to look at him. The dating analysis, Vader said. The chamber architecture. The Necron technology predates every Force-sensitive species in the galaxy by 60 million years. They are not in the Force because the Force developed after them. They are 60 million years older than the living network that the Force exists within. Palpatine looked at him. His expression, in the specific way of a man who had spent 60 years seeing the future through the Force, was the expression of someone who had understood an implication they did not want to understand. The Force cannot see them, he said, because they preceded the Force. They are not part of the living network. They are not living, Vader said. The throne room held this. Then we are blind, Palpatine said. We are blind to the Force. Intelligence dimension, Vader said. Sensor data is still functional. Electronic surveillance. Physical observation. What we lose is the anticipatory advantage, the ability to feel what they will do before they do it. We fight on the data we can physically collect, rather than on force precognition. Palpatine looked at him. "You have been doing that since Galar," he said. "Yes," Vader said. "And your assessment, Lord Vader." Vader looked at the Emperor. "The current doctrine is useless," he said. "The Tarkin doctrine, the principle of demonstrating overwhelming force to produce compliance through fear, requires an enemy that can be frightened. These beings cannot be frightened. They do not have the biological architecture for fear. They are not afraid of the Empire. They do not acknowledge the Empire. To them, we are not an opponent. We are an administrative problem." Palpatine's expression was very still. "An infestation," he said. "To be processed." "Yes," Vader said. "And our weapons, our turbolasers, our star destroyers, our military doctrine was built for fighting enemies that can be killed. These beings reconstruct after damage, unless completely atomized. Conventional engagement destroys them temporarily. They stand back up." "The Death Star," Palpatine said. "Is gone," Vader said. "The second Death Star," Palpatine said, "is not yet operational," Vader said. "I know, but it's superlaser technology." He looked at the Emperor. "A superlaser discharge at close range produces the molecular atomization that permanently defeats their reconstruction. It is the only weapon system we currently have that can permanently destroy them at scale." Palpatine looked at him. "You have a plan," he said. "The beginning of one," Vader said. "There is something else you need to know first." He pulled up the sensor data on the throne room's display system, the map of activated sectors, the propagation rate, the acceleration Piet had documented in Valar. "The campaign is accelerating," he said. "The first activation was a single world. The second was a sector. Valar 11 worlds activating simultaneously. The propagation is not linear. It is building." He looked at Palpatine. "Whatever is commanding this campaign is not reacting to our responses. It activated the Valar sector before Mahdi's fleet arrived. The timing is not defensive, it is scheduled. The campaign was planned in its entirety before it began." "Which means," Palpatine said. "Which means they know how it ends," Vader said. "Or believe they know. The campaign has been running for 6 weeks and has not deviated from its initial trajectory in response to anything we have done." He looked at the map. "Not because they cannot adapt, because they have not needed to." The throne room was quiet. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions. 60 million years old and older. The galaxy that the Sotek dynasty was reclaiming, system by system, with the patient efficiency of administration rather than war. "Then we give them a reason to deviate," Palpatine said. His voice, with a quality in it that Vader recognized from 30 years of service, the specific quality of the Emperor when he had found the angle. "Show me your plan, Lord Vader."
Okay, can we talk about how bad this situation has gotten for a second? Because the Empire just threw Star Destroyers at the problem, and the Necrons basically treated it like a training exercise. And honestly, the part that fascinates me isn't the fleet battle, it's Palpatine. Think about it. This is a guy who spent decades using the Force to stay 10 steps ahead of everybody else. And now he's dealing with an enemy he literally can't see coming. But here's the scary part. We still haven't met the mind behind all of this. If the Necrons are winning this badly without their leader even showing up, what happens when the mastermind finally makes his move?
The plan had 3 components. Vader laid them on the display with the economy of a military briefing that did not have time for anything except what the situation required. "The first component," he said, "the super laser. The second Death Star's super laser array is functional but not yet mounted on the station's primary structure. We detach it. We mount it on a carrier vessel, a modified superstar destroyer platform stripped of its secondary systems to accommodate the power requirements. It becomes a mobile weapons platform specifically designed for engagement against world engines and primary tomb worlds." Palpatine looked at the display. "Deployment timeline," he said. 3 weeks minimum, Vader said. The super laser array requires reconfiguration for the carrier mount. The power coupling between the array and the Superstar Destroyer's reactor system. 2 weeks, Palpatine said. The specific flat precision of someone adjusting a timeline by decree. Vader looked at him. 2 weeks, he said. The second component. Standard turbolaser engagement against Necron forces is ineffective because it does not produce complete molecular atomization. But we have weapons that do. He pulled up the technical specifications. Proton torpedo warheads. To modified for maximum yield detonation at point of impact rather than penetration. Delay the thermal pulse from a maximum yield proton torpedo in direct contact with a Necron warrior produces complete molecular dispersal within a 2-meter radius. Against massed warrior formations, a saturation torpedo strike defeats the reconstruction, Palpatine said. At significant cost of munitions, Vader said. But effectively, yes. We cannot hold ground against them. We can deny them ground. He looked at the display. Orbital saturation. Modified proton torpedo strikes against any world where a tomb world has activated. We reduce the surface to plasma, no organic matter for the scarabs to harvest, no inorganic matter dense enough for the reconstruction protocols to use. We deny them the resource base the campaign depends on. Piet, at the edge of the briefing, said, "My lord, the worlds we would be saturating are already lost," Vader said. The flat precision of someone who had run the calculation and was not going to run it again. Every world in the activated sectors has been stripped of organic matter. The populations are gone. What remains is infrastructure. We deny them the infrastructure. Piet was quiet. The third component, Vader said. The Night Shroud. The electromagnetic field they generate before each activation, it is their primary tactical advantage. It blinds our fleet, disables our navigation, prevents coordination. We need a counter. There is no counter to a planetary-scale electromagnetic field, Palpatine said. The voice of someone who had already investigated this. Not a counter, Vader said. A workaround. The Night Shroud operates on specific electromagnetic frequencies. We cannot block it. But we can operate outside it. He looked at Palpatine. Organic pilots and navigators, operating on manual systems without electronic augmentation. No targeting computers. No automated navigation. Hand calculation hyperspace jumps. He looked at the display. It is slower. It is less accurate. But a pilot navigating by the stars and a manual calculation enters hyperspace in a night shroud and arrives in the right system. Palpatine looked at him. The training time, he said. We don't train, Vader said. We recruit smugglers, independent freighter pilots. Anyone who has navigated without computers, who has run customs, blockades, and border interdictions where electronic systems were a liability rather than an asset. He looked at Palpatine. The galaxy is full of people who fly without autopilot because autopilot gets them caught. We recruit them. The throne room held the plan. Palpatine looked at the display. At the 3 components. At the map of activated sectors with the specific propagation geometry that Vader had identified the inward wave. The acceleration. The scheduled precision of a campaign that had not deviated from its initial design. There is a 4th component, Palpatine said. Vader looked at him. We need to know who is commanding this, Palpatine said. You have described the campaign. You have described the weapons. You have described the logistics. He looked at the map. You have not identified the mind behind it. The sensor data from the subsurface chamber architecture, Vader said. The dynasty markings Draven identified specific iconographic repetition in the chamber designs across every tomb world we've been able to scan. He pulled up the iconographic analysis. A specific symbol, a specific hierarchy structure encoded in the chamber design. He looked at the display. The analysis team has designated the commanding entity as. He looked at the symbol on the display. The Sautek dynasty's marker, the specific ancient iconography of a civilization that had been encoding its identity into its architecture for 60 million years. The Sautek dynasty, Vader said, and at its head, he pulled up the iconographic hierarchy. One specific symbol repeated at the highest tier of every chamber's command architecture, a single Farron. The entity running this campaign has been running it from the beginning. Palpatine looked at the symbol. "Find him," he said. "Everything else you've described, the super laser platform, the orbital saturation, the manual navigation, all of it addresses the campaign's execution. None of it addresses the mind executing it." His eyes found Vader. "A campaign. This precise, this patient, this comprehensively planned, it requires a specific intelligence. Defeat that intelligence, and the campaign loses its coherence." Vader looked at the display. "To find him," he said, "I need to go to the tomb." The deepest activated tomb world was Galar Prime. Not the largest. The Tesseract activation had revealed a tomb complex of significantly greater scale. But Galar was the first, which meant it had been running its full operational cycle the longest, which meant the tomb's internal systems had had the most time to integrate with the campaign's command structure, which meant it had the most data. Vader descended to the surface alone. The city he had walked through 2 weeks ago was different now, not structurally. The buildings were still intact, the paving stones still in place, different in the quality of activity. The Necron warriors had been moving through the city in the first visit, the activation still in its early stages. Now, they had stopped moving. They were standing. Thousands of them, in the streets and the squares and the spaces between buildings, standing with the specific stillness of things that had completed a function and had entered the state that was not standby and was not off, but was the specific quality of beings that did not need to do anything, and were therefore not doing anything. They registered Vader's presence. Every sensor array in every warrior head oriented toward him in the specific synchronized motion of a distributed system updating simultaneously. They did not attack. He walked through them. He had thought about this walking into a city of standing Necron warriors, alone, and had arrived at the calculation that produced this decision. The warriors had not attacked the times, inexorable times, when it observed the Tesseract activation. The warriors on Galar Prime had engaged him individually when he was on the surface, but those had been newly activated units running standard patrol protocols. These were settled units, post-activation. Their function had been completed. They were standing in a completed sector. He was walking through a completed sector. The calculation said they would not engage him because he was not interfering with a function they were executing. The calculation might be wrong. He walked through them anyway because the alternative was not finding what he had come to find. The entrance to the tomb was in the city's administrative center, not marked as an entrance in any way a human would identify. A section of paving stones that phased at his approach, the technology responding to the specific electromagnetic profile of his suit's life support systems as a non-organic presence, and extending the phase-through permission that Necron warrior units received as a standard operational function. He went through the ground. The tomb was vast. He had seen the sensor analysis. He had read Draven's 3-kilometer depth calculation and the hundreds of kilometers extent calculation. He had understood it intellectually. Understanding it intellectually and standing inside it were different things. The chambers extended in every direction beyond the range of his suit's sensor array. The lighting was internal, not illumination in the human sense. The specific ambient radiation of the living metal generating its own light as a function of its operational activity. The pale blue-white of something that was alive in the non-biological way that Necron technology was alive. The geometry was not designed for human occupation. The chambers were large in dimensions that did not correspond to human use, designed for the specific operational requirements of the units that maintained them. He extended the force. Nothing. The tomb was the most thorough nothing he had encountered. At least in the strip city above, The mineral composition of the world generated some ambient force presence. The force ran through all things with any complexity of physical structure, and bedrock had enough complexity to register. Here, in the living metal chambers, the force found nothing because the living metal was not alive in any sense the force recognized. He was navigating entirely on his suit's sensors. The command chamber was in the tomb's deepest section. He knew this not from the force, but from the architectural logic, the specific organization of the chamber hierarchy. The chambers whose design suggested they were support spaces oriented toward a central function, the function they were oriented toward becoming clearer as he moved deeper. He had spent 20 years reading the operational architecture of military installations. Tomb or Star Destroyer, the architectural logic of command was the same. The command chamber was the largest space in the tomb. The Canoptech spiders registered his presence at the entrance. 4 of them, large, spider-like, their sensor arrays the most sophisticated in the tomb. Their function, the maintenance and coordination of everything in the tomb's operational hierarchy. They oriented toward him with the specific synchronized motion of distributed sensor systems updating. They did not attack. They moved aside. Not because they had been instructed to, because his electromagnetic profile, non-organic, suit-based life support, the specific signature of something that was housed in a mechanical shell rather than a biological one matched, imprecisely, but sufficiently, the profile of a being they had instructions for. He moved past them. The command chamber's center held the specific architecture that Draven's analysis had flagged as the highest tier element in the tomb's design, the throne structure, the command interface arrays, the specific organization of a space, designed for a single occupying intelligence to manage everything the tomb did. The throne was empty. He stood in the empty throne room of the Sautek dynasty's Pharaon and looked at the command interface arrays, running their operational cycles and filing their data and managing the campaign that was consuming the galaxy's outer rim, running without their operator present, because an operator who had planned a campaign across 60 million years of preparation did not need to be present for the campaign's execution. He had left instructions. The instructions were running. Vader looked at the interface arrays. He had come here to find the commanding intelligence. He had found its absence and its competence, the specific competence of a mind that had planned well enough that its plan ran without it. He looked at the interfaces. He looked at the data streaming through them, not force-readable, but physically present, the actual data outputs of the campaign's management system. He could not read the Necron iconographic language. He could read the patterns in the data flow. He read them. For 40 minutes, he stood in the empty throne room and read the patterns of a campaign he could not read the language of and assembled what the patterns told him. The campaign had no contingency architecture. In every military plan Vader had encountered or designed in 20 years of operational command, contingency was the architecture, the plan as written and then the plans beneath the plan, the branches that activated when the main path failed. A military plan without contingency architecture was a military plan that expected to succeed. In 40 years of military experience, Vader had encountered a plan that truly expected to succeed once. His own, at Mustafar. He looked at the data flow of the campaign's management system. No contingency architecture. The campaign was designed to run on its primary path because the intelligence that designed it had determined the primary path would succeed. Not as optimism as engineering. The probability matrix had been calculated to a precision that made contingency unnecessary. He stood in the empty throne room for a long moment. He activated his channel. "Piet," he said. "My lord," Piet responded from the Times, inexorable Times in orbit. "The commanding entity is not in the Galar tomb," Vader said. "The tomb is running its campaign without an operator present. The entity is elsewhere." "My lord, if the tomb is running without—" "The campaign was designed for autonomous operation," Vader said. "The commanding entity is not required for the campaign to function. The campaign was planned to a precision that makes oversight unnecessary." He looked at the command arrays, which means the commanding entity is doing something else. Piet was quiet for a moment. "What else is there to do?" he said. Vader looked at the data flows. At the campaign consuming sector after sector with the administrative patience of something that had planned it across 60 million years. At the absence of the mind that had planned it. It is doing what all commanders do when their campaign is proceeding as planned, Vader said. It is preparing the next phase. The next phase revealed itself at 2,300 hours. Not through intelligence, not through analysis. Through a sensor alarm on the time's inexorable times that Draven had not expected to trigger, and that triggered anyway, because he had set it to trigger for events that exceeded his current models, and the event that triggered it exceeded his current models significantly. The world engine entered the Glar sector from the deep outer rim, not from a system, from deep space, from the interstellar void where there were no stars and no gravity wells and no reason for anything to be, moving through the darkness under its own power at a speed that something of its mass should not have been able to achieve. Draven looked at his display for a long time before he reported it. He needed to be sure. He ran the scan 3 times. "Lord Vader," he said. His voice, with the specific quality it had, every time he delivered impossible information, which was the quality of someone who had been delivering impossible information for weeks and had stopped finding the impossibility surprising without stopping finding it alarming. "We are reading a contact in the Galar system approach. Mass reading." He looked at his display. "Mass reading is consistent with a planetary body, approximately the size of a small moon, moving under directed propulsion." Vader was still in the tomb when the alert came through. He processed it with the speed of someone for whom strategic information arrived through the Force, and who had spent the past 3 weeks developing the specific discipline of processing strategic information through electronic channels. Instead, a planetary body, moving under directed propulsion, entering the sector. He had read the iconographic analysis Draven had produced from the tomb chamber designs. He had the data package on Necron military assets that the analysis team had been building from the tomb's own records. Records that the Canoptech spiders had not protected from physical observation because they had not been designed to protect against observation from beings that should not be in the tomb at all. He knew what a world engine was. He went back through the ground. The times, inexorable times, pulled the world engine on enhanced optical display as it entered the Glar system's orbital approach. The crew looked at it. Nobody said anything. It was the size of a moon. Not a large moon, a small one, approximately the size of Coruscant's natural satellite, the one that the planet's light pollution had made invisible to most of its trillion inhabitants for centuries. But a moon, moving under power, covered in the living metal architecture of Necron construction. Its surface, not the cratered geology of a natural satellite, but the specific engineered geometry of something that had been built or converted. Draven was looking at the surface architecture on the enhanced display and was reaching a conclusion he reported with the specific economy of someone who had given up on framing impossible information comfortably. "It's a tomb world," he said. "A mobile tomb world. The internal structure." He pointed at the sensor overlay showing the subsurface architecture. "It's the same design as the Galar tomb. The same chamber hierarchy. The same command architecture." He looked at the display. "Except this one has weapon emitters on the surface." He traced them the specific space distribution of weapons platforms across the moon's surface, oriented outward. Everywhere. Every surface quadrant. Multiple emitter types. "What is the weapons range on the primary emitters?" Piet said. Draven ran the calculation. He looked at the number. He ran it again. "The primary weapons appear to be a scaled variant of the death ray particle beam," he said. "At the scale of the emitters I'm reading," he looked at his display, "effective range is approximately 200,000 kilometers." Piet looked at Vader. 200,000 kilometers. The times, inexorable times, was at 800,000 kilometers and was reading the world engine clearly on enhanced optical. 800,000 kilometers was considered safe observation distance for a Star Destroyer observing a military asset. The World Engine's weapons could reach 4 times that. "What is it doing?" Piet said. Draven watched the display. "Moving toward Galar Prime," he said. "Specifically toward the Tomb World access point we identified in the planetary capital. It is..." He looked at his display. "It is moving to resupply the Tomb World. The campaign has consumed the Galar sector's organic matter, and the Tomb's reanimation protocol reserves will need replenishment for the next activation cycle." He looked at Piet. "It's a logistics vessel, my lord. The World Engine is a mobile logistics and command platform for the campaign." Vader looked at the World Engine. At the mobile Tomb World, moving through the Galar system, with a specific, purposeful pace of something executing a planned function. At the weapons, emitters distributed across its surface. At the campaign's next phase, assembling itself in front of him in the specific way that military plans assembled, not one component at a time, but all at once. The full design becoming visible when the pieces reached the right spatial relationship to each other. The superlaser platform was the right answer. The superlaser platform was 3 weeks from deployment. The World Engine was already here. "Piet," he said. "How many Star Destroyers do we have in this sector cluster?" 37, my lord, Piet said, "including the inexorable." "Pull them all," Vader said. "Every Star Destroyer in the sector cluster to my position." Piet looked at him. "My lord, that will leave 6 sector governors without fleet support during an active Necron." "The sector governors in the affected zones are already without fleet support," Vader said. "The sectors adjacent to the active zone need the fleet. Pull them." Piet activated the fleet channel. Vader looked at the World Engine. At the super laser platform in its 2-week construction window. At the World Engine in the Galar system now. "What do you do?" he said, not to Piet, to the display, to the campaign, to the intelligence that was somewhere in the galaxy doing something else while its plan ran. "When you find out the plan doesn't surprise me?" The display held the World Engine. The World Engine held its course. The Galar system held its silence. Below on the surface of Galar Prime, in the tomb chambers 3 kilometers underground, the command arrays ran their data flows with the specific autonomous efficiency of a plan executing without its author's oversight. And somewhere in the galaxy, in a location Vader could not feel through the Force and could not find through the sensor data he currently had, the intelligence that had designed the campaign received the same sensor data that the Inexorables arrays were generating. It processed the data. It noted the 37 Star Destroyers being pulled to the Galar sector. It noted the specific tactical geometry of concentrated Imperial fleet assets in a single location. It noted the absence of those assets from the sectors they had been protecting. And Imitek, the Stormlord, Pharaon of the Sautek dynasty, from his position in the mobile Tomb World that his sensor arrays were, at this moment, keeping in the inexorable sensor shadow the specific geometric position that the World Engine had been maintaining since the Inexorable arrived, the position that kept it outside the Imperial ship's sensor arc, reviewed the data and updated his campaign plan. Not significantly. The contingency that he had not needed to encode because he had planned beyond the need for contingencies had simply become the plan. He had not needed to deviate. He had simply needed to wait for the organic commander to make the specific decision that organic commanders always made when they were afraid. Concentration. Put everything in one place. Leave the other places empty. He activated the Night Shroud across 20 systems simultaneously. Not the systems adjacent to the activated zone, the core systems. The ones that the 37 Star Destroyers had just left. The Night Shroud reached Coruscant at 0347 hours. Not as a weapon, not as an attack, as whether the specific quality of an electromagnetic phenomenon spreading across a system the way a storm front spread. The leading edge of it visible on the Supremacy's sensor arrays as a progressive frequency degradation across every communication band simultaneously. Each band going dark in the sequence that the Night Shroud consumed them, the higher frequencies first, then the mid-range. then the low-frequency emergency channels that the Empire's crisis protocols reserved for exactly this kind of systemic failure. The emergency channels lasted 4 minutes longer than everything else. Then they went dark too. Coruscant, 1 trillion people, the most densely populated world in the galaxy, the administrative center of every institution the Empire had built over 20 years of consolidation, went silent. On the Supremacy, the communications officer looked at her display with the expression of someone watching a process she had no mechanism to stop. "My lord," she said to the empty throne room. Palpatine was not in the throne room. He was at the viewport. He had felt it coming not through the Force, which told him nothing about the Necrons through the specific dark side sensitivity that was not precognition but was the accumulated pattern recognition of 60 years of reading power flows. The specific way the Force responded to the absence of things it should be reading. The Force had been telling him nothing about the Necrons for 3 weeks. It had also been telling him nothing about the 20 core systems that the Night Shroud was now consuming. The absence of Force data from 20 systems was itself data. He had felt the absence spreading. He had known what it meant. He had not known what to do about it. That was the specific horror of it, not that the Night Shroud was coming, but that knowing it was coming produced nothing actionable. He could not fight the weather. He could not intercept an electromagnetic field with a lightsaber. He could not feel the beings generating it through the Force, and therefore could not locate them to destroy them before they deployed it. He knew and was helpless. That was a condition he had not been in since he was 9 years old. He looked at the Coruscant system on the sensor display at the Night Shroud, washing across the system's orbital plane. The planet below going dark in the sequential way that systems went dark when their communications infrastructure failed progressively rather than catastrophically. The lights on Coruscant were still on. The power grid was not electronic in the vulnerable sense. The Coruscant power infrastructure was hardened against conventional electromagnetic interference. The planet had been the target of enough military action across enough centuries that hardening was standard. The Night Shroud was not conventional electromagnetic interference. It was 60 million years more sophisticated than what the Coruscant power grid had been hardened against. The lights went out. Not all of them. The truly hardened infrastructure, the deepest levels, the military installations, the Imperial Palace's internal power held. But the surface grid, the commercial grid, the residential grid, the specific illumination of a planet that had never been dark in living memory because 1 trillion people needed power and the planet generated it failed. Coruscant went dark. 1 trillion people on a world that had never been dark. Palpatine looked at it.
Just picture that for a second. 1 trillion people on the most important planet in the galaxy suddenly realizing the lights are going out. That's nightmare fuel.
Vader received the Coruscant alert in the Galar sector. At the same moment he received the alert from 11 other core systems. 12 core systems simultaneously. He looked at the sensor display that Draven was updating in real time, the Night Shroud spreading across core systems that had not been in the campaign's affected zone, that were not adjacent to the activated sectors, that were 3 rings of unaffected space away from the frontier of the reclamation. He looked at it. He looked at the world engine that had been in the times inexorable. Is sensor shadow, this entire time. The specific geometric position that he had not identified as significant because he had been looking at the world engine's course and its weapons and its logistics function, and had not been tracking its sensor shadow the way he would have tracked a cloaked vessel's sensor shadow because the Necrons did not cloak. They had not needed to. They had simply positioned the world engine where the time's inexorable sensor arc did not cover. He extended the force toward the world engine. Nothing. He looked at it on the display. At the mobile tomb world that had been here the entire time, running its logistics function, while Imatech used the world engine's sensor network, which was not affected by the time's inexorable, is passive sensor shadow because the world engine's sensors were active rather than passive and operated on frequencies. The Imperial array did not monitor to watch Vader pull 37 Star Destroyers into the Galar sector. To watch the sectors those 37 Star Destroyers had been protecting become empty. To watch Vader hand him the core, he looked at the display for a long moment. The specific quality of a military commander who had just understood the full shape of what he had walked into. "Piet," he said. "My lord," Piet said, his voice with the quality it had when he had already seen the display and was waiting for the instruction that addressed what the display was showing. "The 37 Star Destroyers," Vader said. "We pulled them from the sectors adjacent to the active zone." "Yes, my lord." "The sectors adjacent to the active zone," Vader said. "Which sectors border the core?" The bridge was quiet. "Yes, my lord," Piet said. Vader looked at the world engine. "He was waiting for me to do that," he said. "Not to Piet, not to anyone." The specific statement of someone who had run the calculation and found the result and was saying it out loud because it needed to exist in the air rather than only in his processing. "He was waiting," Vader said, "for me to concentrate the fleet, to leave the buffer zone empty, to create the corridor that made the core accessible." He looked at the display. The world engine entering this sector was not logistics, it was positioning. It was here to watch what I did with the fleet. He looked at the Coruscant system, going dark on the display. "At 1 trillion people." "How long," he said, "until the night shroud in the core systems reaches full saturation?" Draven ran the calculation. "Based on the Tessran and Valar saturation rates," he said, "approximately 6 hours." "And after saturation," Vader said, "how long before the first warrior units phase to the surface?" "On Galar, the first warrior emerged 4 hours after the night shroud reached full saturation," Draven said. "But Galar was a single tomb world." "The core systems," he looked at his display. "The core systems will have been seismically stable for longer. The tomb complexes beneath them will be deeper. The phase-through distance greater." He ran the calculation. "I would estimate 8 to 12 hours after saturation before ground forces emerge." Vader looked at the timeline. 6 hours to full saturation. 8 to 12 hours after that, before warriors emerged on Coruscant. 14 to 18 hours total. He looked at the 37 Star Destroyers assembled in the Galar sector. At the superlaser platform under construction, 2 weeks from completion. At the world engine and the times inexorable. Sensor shadow, logistics function irrelevant. Its real function already complete. "Piet," he said. "The fleet. Maximum speed, all vessels to Coruscant." Piet looked at him. "My lord," he said. "The night shroud. Navigation in a full saturation field. Will be unreliable," Vader said. "I know. We don't jump to Coruscant. We jump to the outer system approach outside the saturation radius. We calculate the edge of the night shroud's projection based on the saturation rate Draven has been tracking. We jump to a point 2 saturation radii out, and we cross the night shroud boundary on sublight." He looked at Piet. "Slower, but we arrive." Piet was already at the navigation station. "And the world engine," Piet said. Vader looked at it on the display. At the mobile tomb world that had watched him concentrate his fleet and had transmitted the data to whoever was receiving it and had completed its function with the specific efficiency of a tool that had been built for a purpose. He looked at the superlaser platform. 2 weeks from completion. He looked at the world engine. "Here, now, in the Galar sector. Leave 3 Star Destroyers," he said. "Their task, do not engage the world engine. Observe it. Track its movements. Do not let it leave this system without transmitting its exit vector." Piet looked at him. "You want to follow it," he said. "The intelligence commanding this campaign is not in this tomb," Vader said. "It is somewhere else, doing something else. The world engine is a command and logistics platform. Where it goes, the commanding intelligence either is or is connected to." He looked at the display. "We follow the world engine to its commander. After Coruscant," Piet said. "After Coruscant," Vader said. He moved toward his shuttle. The times. Executor. Times Vader's personal super Star Destroyer. The flagship that had been in the Galar system since the beginning of the investigation led the fleet toward the core at maximum sublight, not hyperspace. The Night Shroud's projection radius was still being calculated, and until the calculation was confirmed, committing a super star destroyer and 34 surviving star destroyers to a hyperspace jump with an uncertain electromagnetic interference field was the specific risk that Vader had spent 3 weeks watching Imperial commanders take, and watching it cost them everything. He stood on the Time's executor's bridge. He extended the Force toward Coruscant. The Force told him 1 trillion people were there, not their distress, not their fear, not the specific emotional quality of a population that knew what was coming. The Force told him they were alive, which was different from telling him they were safe, and the difference was the most important fact in the current operational picture. They were alive. The Night Shroud was not the same thing as the Scarabs. The Night Shroud disabled electronics. It did not consume organic matter. It was the preparation for the ground campaign, not the ground campaign itself. They were alive, and they were dark, and they had 14 hours before the first warriors phased through the bedrock of the most densely populated world in the galaxy. He thought about the plan. The superlaser platform in 2 weeks. The modified proton torpedo strikes he had briefed to Palpatine effective, but requiring munitions at a scale that the current fleet complement could not carry without resupply. And the resupply depots in the affected sectors were in sectors the Night Shroud had just consumed. The manual navigation workaround useful for the fleet, applicable at scale if they had weeks to recruit and deploy the pilots. They did not have weeks. They had 14 hours. He thought about the plan in the context of 14 hours and found that the plan in its entirety was a plan for the war that followed the next 14 hours. None of it addressed the next 14 hours. The next 14 hours required a different answer. He looked at the core systems on the display. At 12, systems going dark. At the specific geometry of the Night Shroud's coverage, 12 systems, centered not randomly, but with the specific precision of a campaign planned by a military intelligence that had studied the Empire's geography for 6 weeks. The 12 systems formed a specific shape. They surrounded Coruscant. Not a siege, a quarantine. The Night Shroud was active in every system adjacent to Coruscant simultaneously, cutting the planet off from the systems around it the way a surgical instrument cut tissue from surrounding tissue. Coruscant was not just dark. Coruscant was isolated. He looked at the quarantine geometry, at the specific precision of it. He thought about Imhotep, a being he had never seen, never felt through the Force, never located, despite 3 weeks of trying to find the mind behind the campaign. A being who had sat in the Galar tomb's empty throne room and left his plan running autonomously because the plan was precise enough not to need him. A being who had watched Vader pull 37 Star Destroyers into the Galar sector and had, in the time it took to process that data, converted Vader's tactical concentration into a strategic corridor and walked through it. A being who had planned this 60 million years ago and had updated the plan in real time as needed and had not needed to update it significantly. He looked at the quarantine geometry again, at the specific shape of it, at the 12 surrounding systems. At the one system they were surrounding, he ran the Force across the quarantine geometry, not looking for Necrons, which the Force could not find, looking for the specific quality of Force presence that the quarantine shape implied. 12 systems of nothing surrounding one system of 1 trillion lives. The Force told him 1 trillion people. The Force told him the planet was surrounded. The Force told him. He stopped. He extended the Force again. With the specific, focused attention he gave things that had just told him something he had not expected. The Force told him the planet was surrounded. The Force also told him that the Night Shroud's full saturation in the surrounding systems was creating the specific force-reading condition that he had been operating in since Galar, the absence of organic life in areas where organic life should be, the Force finding nothing in the adjacent systems because the Night Shroud was not the same as organic absence. The Night Shroud disrupted electronics, not organic life. The Force could read through the Night Shroud. He extended further. The Night Shroud's electromagnetic interference did not affect force transmission because the force was not electromagnetic. It was a property of living things, and it transmitted through living things regardless of what the electromagnetic environment was doing. He could feel through the Night Shroud. He could not see through it. He could not navigate through it electronically. He could not communicate through it conventionally. But he could feel through it. And in the surrounding systems, in the 12 systems that should have been empty of organic life because the Night Shroud had been generating for hours, and the Night Shroud was the precursor to organic matter removal, he felt something. Not Necrons. The Force still could not read Necrons. Something else. Organic. Living. Moving with a specific quality of directed motion rather than civilian population distribution. A fleet. Not Imperial ships. The Force did not tell him ship types. The Force told him the crews of ships, the organic beings aboard them, and the organic beings aboard these ships had the specific quality of military. Not Imperial military. Something else. He focused. He had not used the Force as a navigation instrument before. He had used it as a combat instrument, an intelligence instrument, a political instrument across 20 years of service. He had never needed to navigate with it. He navigated with it now. The organic presences in the surrounding systems alive, in ships, moving had a specific distribution, not random, not defensive positioning. The distribution had a geometry. The geometry was converging on Coruscant. He said. The 12 Night Shroud systems. What is the current sensor status on any organic vessels in those systems? Night Shroud saturation is above 70% in all 12 systems, Piet said. Electronic sensor penetration is severely degraded. He looked at his display. We have partial readings on what appear to be ship-scale contacts in the Coruscant adjacent systems, but confirmation is they are converging on Coruscant, Vader said. Piet looked at him. The Necrons? He said. Not Necrons, Vader said. Organic vessels, in the Night Shroud, moving under manual navigation. He looked at the Force, reading he was holding the specific organic presences in their converging geometry. How many ships in the Empire were running manual navigation protocols when the Night Shroud activated? Piet looked at him. None, my lord, he said. The Night Shroud activated without warning. No Imperial vessels had time to... He stopped. He understood. Not Imperial vessels, Piet said. Not Imperial vessels, Vader said. The Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance, which had been navigating without full computer assistance for years, running blockades, crossing Imperial interdiction zones. The specific operational necessity of people who could not rely on equipment that the Empire could detect had been in the Night Shroud when it activated, and had kept flying. Because they knew how to fly without computers. He had told the Emperor that manual navigation was the Night Shroud workaround, and that recruiting smugglers and freighter pilots would take weeks. The Rebel Alliance had been flying manually for years. They were already inside the Night Shroud. They were converging on Coruscant. Not to defend it, they did not defend Imperial planets. That was not their operational context, but because Coruscant was the Empire's capital, and a capital going dark in a crisis that the Empire could not manage, produced the specific strategic opportunity that the Rebel Alliance had been waiting for since Yavin. He looked at the convergence geometry, at the Rebel fleet moving through a Night Shroud that had grounded the Imperial Navy, using skills developed to evade that Navy toward the capital of the government they had been fighting for years. The Night Shroud that Imhotep had deployed to isolate Coruscant for the Necron ground campaign had simultaneously grounded the Empire's response fleet and created the conditions for the Rebel Alliance to reach Coruscant unopposed. He had pulled 37 Star Destroyers to the Galar sector. The Rebel fleet was converging on Coruscant. The Night Shroud was at 70% saturation and rising. In 11 hours, Necron warriors would begin phasing through the bedrock of the most populated world in the galaxy. In the same 11 hours, the Rebel Alliance would reach Coruscant. He looked at the operational picture, at the specific shape of a situation that had been built by an intelligence 60 million years older than the war it had just reordered. Imhotep had not simply consumed the Empire's outer territories. He had consumed the Empire's war. The conflict between the Empire and the Rebellion, 20 years of political maneuvering, the Clone Wars, the Jedi Purge, Palpatine's rise, the Death Star, Yavin, all of it had been irrelevant to the Necron campaign. The Rebels and the Empire were both organic civilizations occupying Necron-tier territory. The Night Shroud over the core had not distinguished between them. It had simply put them in the same place at the same time with the same problem. "Piet," Vader said. "My lord." "Open a communication channel," Vader said. "All frequencies. Broadcast through every communication system on the Times Executor." Piet looked at him. "My lord, the Night Shroud is not at full saturation yet," Vader said. "We still have communication capacity. Use it." He looked at the display. "The Rebel fleet and the Coruscant approach they are receiving on all frequencies. Open the channel." Piet opened the channel. Vader looked at the display. At the Rebel fleet converging on the capital of the Empire he served. At the Necron campaign consuming the galaxy that the Rebellion was trying to liberate. At the 11 hours before warriors phased through Coruscant's bedrock. He activated the channel. "This is Darth Vader," he said. The vocoder giving his voice the flat mechanical weight it always had, the voice that had preceded torture and execution, and the specific terror of Imperial authority across 20 years of deployment. "I am transmitting to the Rebel fleet currently approaching Coruscant." He looked at the display. "You are approaching a planet that will be under Necron ground assault in approximately 11 hours. You cannot fight the Necrons with standard weapons. I have information you need. I have a plan that requires your capability." He looked at the Night Shroud spreading across the display. "The Empire and the Rebellion have been at war for 20 years. The Necrons do not know we have been at war. To them, we are the same infestation." He looked at the display, at the dark zone spreading across the core. At 1 trillion people, on a world that was about to become the most contested ground in the galaxy. "In 11 hours, he said, "the choice between Empire and Rebellion will be irrelevant. The choice will be between organic life and the beings who view organic life as a resource." He looked at the display. "You know how to fly in the Night Shroud. I have weapons that can permanently kill what you're about to face. Neither of us can do what needs to be done without the other." He closed the channel. The bridge was quiet. Piet looked at the display. At the Rebel fleet. At Coruscant. At the Night Shroud, reaching full saturation across the core. "My lord," he said. "The Emperor." "I will address the Emperor," Vader said. The Executor accelerated toward Coruscant on sublight, the manual navigation that the Night Shroud forced upon them, the specific slow approach of a ship navigating by instruments that were increasingly unreliable, the approach that would take hours. Hours they had. Barely. Vader looked at the dark display, at the campaign that had consumed 37 sectors in 6 weeks, and had now consumed the strategic architecture of the Empire's 20-year conflict with the Rebellion in 40 minutes. At the intelligence somewhere in the galaxy that had planned this with the specific patience of 60 million years and was, right now, receiving data indicating that the organic civilizations in the reclamation zone had begun to cooperate. He thought about that. About whether Imhotep had planned for it. About whether there was anything in the campaign's design that addressed the specific scenario of the 2 primary organic military forces in the reclamation zone coordinating in response to the ground campaign. He did not know. He could not feel it through the Force. He would find out in 11 hours. In the dark between the stars, they had always been waiting. The Empire had built its power on the assumption that it was the most ancient thing in the galaxy. It was not even close.
Man, what a story. And honestly, the image that keeps sticking in my head is Coruscant going dark. A trillion people on the most important world in the galaxy suddenly losing power while Darth Vader realizes he's been outplayed by an enemy he can't even sense through the Force. My technical hot take? The Necrons didn't beat the Empire because they had bigger ships. They beat the Empire because they attacked communication, navigation, logistics, and information. They turned the Empire's greatest strengths into weaknesses. And here's the part I genuinely don't know. Did Imhotep already plan for the Empire and the Rebellion to work together? Or is this the first move he didn't see coming? So let me know in the comments. If you were Vader, would you trust the Rebel Alliance long enough to save Coruscant? And if you enjoyed this crossover, make sure you're subscribed because the next one is going to be absolutely insane. Stay legendary, keep imagining the impossible, and I'll see you in the next crossover.